All right, today we're going to dive into Cushing syndrome. It's this fascinating situation where one of the body's most critical survival tools basically goes rogue and starts to break things down from the inside out. It's a perfect example of just how delicate that biological balance is that keeps us all going. So that's really the big question we're tackling here. How does a hormone that's designed to save your life in a crisis turn into this relentless internal saboteur? It all comes down to a broken control system. Let's get into it. First up, let's meet the main character in our story, a hormone called cortisol. Now, in a healthy body, cortisol is the hero of any short-term stress. But in Cushing syndrome, it's kind of like a hero who saves the day and then just refuses to ever leave. And make no mistake, cortisol is absolutely vital. You can think of it as your body's own emergency first responder. The second you face a threat, it floods your system to dump glucose for quick energy, it jacks up your blood pressure to get that energy moving faster, and it slams the brakes on inflammation. It's a brilliant system for a quick sprint. But here's the problem. Cushing's isn't a short sprint. It's a marathon that the body is forced to run without any training. The real issue here isn't just the presence of cortisol, it's the overwhelming, nonstop excess. That emergency state, it just never ends. So, how on earth does this happen? Well, to really get why it fails, you first have to appreciate how elegant the body's normal control system is. It's a system that, in this case, has completely lost its brakes. Normally, it works kind of like a super smart thermostat for stress. Your brain, specifically the hypothalamus and pituitary, tells your adrenal glands, hey, turn on the cortisol heat. Then, once the level gets just right, cortisol itself sends a signal back to the brain that says, okay, we're good, you can shut it down now. It's this beautiful self-regulating system called a negative feedback loop. And right here, this is where it all goes wrong. In Cushing's, that critical stop signal is either completely ignored or just bypassed altogether. The thermostat is broken. The furnace just keeps blasting out cortisol with no off switch, and that leads to this dangerous, uncontrolled rise. So what happens when that cortisol switch is just stuck in the on position 24/7? Well, the very same actions that would save you in a 5-minute crisis become incredibly destructive when they're stretched out over months or years. It starts this damaging cascade all throughout the body. First, the body literally starts to cannibalize itself. To keep that blood sugar sky high for this never-ending emergency, cortisol starts breaking down protein from your muscles, from your skin. It's basically tearing down the walls of the house just to keep the furnace running. Second, cortisol completely reprograms how your body stores fat. So instead of it being distributed normally, it starts getting packed into these really specific and kind of strange places, like the abdomen, the face, and the upper back. And this becomes a classic telltale sign of the condition. Third, it just creates total metabolic chaos. Cortisol is constantly pumping glucose into the blood, but at the same time, it's making the body's cells resistant to insulin, the very hormone that's supposed to handle all that sugar. It's a direct path to what we call steroid-induced diabetes. Fourth, and this is where it gets even more complicated, in these super high concentrations, cortisol starts to act like a master of disguise. It actually mimics other hormones, and it tricks the kidneys into holding on to way too much salt and water, which, you guessed it, directly drives up blood pressure. And finally, the body's own defenses are just taken offline. See, cortisol is a powerful anti-inflammatory. That's great for short bursts, but when it's chronic, it suppresses your immune system, leaving your body vulnerable to all sorts of infections and making it really hard to heal properly. Okay, so we've seen all the damage happening on the inside, but how does that actually show up on the outside? Let's connect the dots between the internal biochemistry and the external clues that doctors look for. This is where it all comes together. This is the key that unlocks the entire puzzle. It's like a translation guide from the body's internal chaos to a diagnostic checklist. So that constant protein breakdown, that's what causes the thin, fragile skin, those classic deep purple stretch marks, and the muscle weakness. That bizarre fat redistribution, well, that directly leads to the moon face and the buffalo hump. The out-of-control glucose, the high blood pressure, the weakened immune system, they all have these direct, measurable consequences. Every single external clue is a clear signal pointing back to a specific internal process that's gone completely haywire. So when clinicians are faced with all these signals, how do they solve the puzzle? How do they even begin to try and restore the body's delicate balance? The diagnostic process is actually this fantastic piece of medical detective work. First, they have to prove there's too much cortisol floating around.
Then they do a test to see if that off switch is actually broken. After that, by measuring the signal hormone called ACTH, they can start to figure out where the problem is coming from. And finally, they use imaging to find the actual culprit, which a lot of the time is a tiny little tumor.
And this brings us to a really crucial fork in the road. Is the problem ACTH dependent? Meaning, is a tumor in the brain or somewhere else screaming at the adrenal glands to make cortisol? Or is it ACTH independent, where the adrenal glands themselves have just gone totally rogue and are making cortisol all on their own? Figuring that out is absolutely key to choosing the right treatment.
So, if there's one thing to take away from all this, it's this central idea. Cortisol is an amazing, powerful tool for short-term survival. But when that tool is never put back in the toolbox, it becomes the very agent of the body's own systematic breakdown. This whole story is just such a powerful reminder that our health is this constant, dynamic balancing act. Cushing syndrome shows us exactly what can happen when just one system, the stress response system, gets stuck on. And it leaves us with a final question to think about. What other systems in our body are relying on a similar delicate balance to keep everything running smoothly?